wear the Star of David around my neck for 3 years now. And I look at it every morning, and I look at the 6 triangles pointing in different directions. They share the center. And I would like every Israeli to remember that although the Star of David that's on your flag points in many different directions, you share the center. Now come back to the center and remember that your worst political opponent, your worst enemy in Israel would never kill your child, would never rape your daughter. You cannot afford fighting in public. It kills me to see Israelis pointing fingers at one another. Not now.
Hello and welcome to State of a Nation. I'm Elon Levy. Egypt, Jordan, Syria and Lebanon are no more than a couple hours drive away from any given point in Israel. But as far as we're concerned, they could be a world away. They don't understand us, we don't understand them, and we don't understand what they don't understand about us. The Arab world has been telling myths about Israel. Myths for which it's paid a terrible price. My guest on today's episode has made it her life's mission to correct those misconceptions in the Arab world about Israel and the Jews. Rawan Osman runs the Arabs Ask project on social media. She was born in Damascus, grew up in Beirut, lived in Saudi Arabia and Qatar, and never saw a Jew until she lived in Strasbourg and for the first time saw a Jewish quarter that still had Jews living in it. We meet today in Tel Aviv as she comes to Israel to explore, discover, and to educate. Together we talk about the fairy tales that the Arab world tells about Israel and the Jews. We talk about why anti-Semitism is so deeply rooted in the Arab world and what can be done against it. And we talk about what Iran and the Iranian regime is really plotting for the Middle East and how the West is sleepwalking into disaster. Welcome to State of a Nation.
Breaking news out of Israel this morning.
Shocking hostage taking.
Hundreds of Israelis are dead.
I want to bring in Israeli government spokesman.
What happens when the 4-day pause?
How do you resolve this?
Where does this go?
Rawan Habibti, welcome to State of a Nation.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here with you.
I've been looking forward to this conversation since we met in Milan, doing a panel discussion with our mutual friend Hillel Neuer, another guest here on the podcast, and I was fascinated by your story. You were born in Syria to a Muslim family, one parent Shiite, the other Sunni. You grew up in Lebanon. You spent time living in both Qatar and Saudi Arabia, and now you live in Germany. So how did you end up sitting on this couch across from me here in Tel Aviv?
Because I want to. I wouldn't be able to sleep if I were back home in Germany, thinking about this imminent war. Hopefully it won't happen, but this is wishful thinking. We're both realistic and we know that a confrontation is inevitable.
That it's already happening. I mean, Hezbollah
It's
declared
ongoing.
war. It's ongoing. The question is whether it escalates to an all-out, uncontrolled war.
When will it blow up and expand? So as you said, I'm half Lebanese, half Syrian. The first 18 years of my life I spent in Lebanon, and I hated the Israelis and the Jews, although I grew up, my parents were Sunni and Shia, but we were secular. We attended a French Catholic school. So religion in my circle was irrelevant. But in spite of that, we hated the neighbors in the south because we always went to wars with them. And it is important to understand that the Israeli narrative is omitted from our existence. So I grew up never hearing your version of the events. I realized in my 20s, when I moved to France and lived among Jews, which was a shock at the beginning to realize I actually live in a Jewish quarter inhabited by Jews, unlike the ones in Damascus and Beirut.
Right, of course, which are Jewish quarters in name only because the Jews were
Jewless.
purged. Right.
Absolutely. But in France, I was living among Jews, and I realized that my perception of the Jews was constructed by Hassan Nasrallah, my entire life, all I know about Israel, Haaretz, his favorite newspaper, he always quotes them. I learned a lot about Israel from him. Also the wars, it is his story. It's his version that we believe. So nobody tells you we killed a few Israelis and that's why we are at war. And slowly I learned the history of the Jews, of Israel, and I grew fond of it.
That's fascinating. And I'm wondering why your perception of Israel should be informed by the leader of an Iranian proxy army that has illegally occupied part of your country, Lebanon, when you are secular, not Iranian, connected to the wider world. Why is this story getting funneled through Hezbollah?
I was born in the 80s, so that was after or during even the Lebanese Civil War. And Hezbollah was one of the strongest actors. Today, Hezbollah grew to become stronger than the Lebanese army itself. And they were perceived as heroes. I grew up as a child, as a teenager, understanding that the south is occupied, southern Lebanon, by the Israelis. And only Hezbollah dares confront them, defy them. And of course, you look at them and admire these men, because what you hear, the rhetoric you are subjected to in the radio, on TV, at school, your parents, your neighbors, everybody glorifies these freedom fighters.
Holding the banner of the resistance.
Absolutely. So why would I challenge what I hear from Nasrallah if I don't get out of the box? And many are surprised to know that I don't have access to uncensored information in the Middle East. I didn't have access. Nowadays we have social media, so the game has changed. People are surprised to know that today Turkey bans Wikipedia in this day and age. So it was very difficult to break out of the world they painted for you. And in France, I think one of the most shocking videos I've seen, when I wanted to understand why are these Jews portrayed as monsters, because they didn't seem to be in any way
You're walking
hostile.
around Strasbourg and suddenly you can't find their horns.
No, they're friendly, they're helpful, they're nice to one another. And one of the most shocking videos was one early of back in the days, at the beginnings of Nasrallah, when he was explaining the plan, Hezbollah's agenda. And then I realized, this is not the Lebanese agenda. He's working for Wilayat al-Faqih in Iran. This has nothing to do with us. This is purely Shiite. This is why Hezbollah fighters are only Shia. They have allies, but they only trust their own. They're not invested in Lebanon, not at all.
That's intriguing. I mean, I'm wondering, you described this on the one hand, Hezbollah has this grip on much of the Lebanese imagination and sympathies. On the other hand, you describe it as this Iranian implant, this foreign presence that has taken control of Lebanon. And I'm wondering, I will talk about Hezbollah and the situation with Iran later, but in terms of the attitudes in Lebanon, to what extent Hezbollah is seen within Lebanese society as being an authentic part of the Lebanese state, of the Lebanese country, or it's seen as being a foreign Iranian presence?
Interesting. We are in 2024. Hezbollah was cherished by everybody when I was a teenager back in the days, and they are perceived as the liberators of the South. Many Lebanese understood, meanwhile, that that was a buffer zone, and those responsible for the Israeli invasion of southern Lebanon were the PLO and their allies among the Lebanese.
Because of the constant rocket fire on Israel's north in the 1970s, which pushed Israel into this offensive inside Lebanon to push Palestinian terrorists away from the border, eerily reminiscent of what we're having now with the threat to Hezbollah, back off or we're going to have to push you away.
Plus terror attacks against Israeli civilians. We also perceived these stories as heroic. We didn't understand that Israel can give you a decade or two. They tried through diplomacy to push the PLO out, and eventually they had to intervene to opt for the military solution, as always, as it seems that this is the only solution for the situation now. They were cherished, respected, perceived as heroes. However, Israel left in year 2000, and Hezbollah, until this day, refuses to disarm, to become part of the Lebanese society.
In violation of UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which demands that the Lebanese army be the only armed force south of the Litani River, and yet it's filled with Iranian missiles controlled by Mr. Nasrallah and co.
How would you like to make them disarm? They are supported, they are stronger than the army. This has been going on for so long. The problem has become so big it doesn't fit under the carpet anymore. Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. Now we have to fight with the elephant in the room. I must say that the fact that Hezbollah refused to disarm, obviously they had political aspirations. Nowadays, they control half of the Lebanese parliament. Not half of the seats are theirs, but it's theirs and their allies. And they pointed that gun at the Lebanese in 2007. And in 2011, something really interesting happened in Syria. We saw Hezbollah as the liberator, those who defended the Lebanese and those who are invested in the right for self-determination for the Palestinians, the poor Palestinians. Now, all of a sudden, when there was a Syrian uprising, Hezbollah sided with the oppressor, with the dictator. And suddenly you realize, many realized, even among the Shia in Lebanon, that Hezbollah's cause is not a just one. It is political, and they will do anything to save and support their allies, and they killed many Syrians. Nasrallah tried to lie about it for a while, but then the Syrians they killed in fighting, they killed Hezbollah militants, and this came out to the public, and all of a sudden, here you go, Nasrallah is bragging about it, about his alliance with al-Assad, about his alliance with Iran. It's no longer a secret. They're not ashamed of it. And they are defiant to this smaller camp in Lebanon that does not want them. And this camp is growing steadily.
I suppose what I'm trying to ask is, we have now had over 10 months of Hezbollah attacks on northern Israel. And I want to know whether Hezbollah is still seen within Lebanon as the great defender and resistor fighting for the Lebanese people, or whether the Lebanese people think that it is a foreign implant that is bringing disaster on them and a totally unnecessary war.
Most of the Lebanese understand that Hezbollah is provoking Israel, but nobody can stop Hezbollah.
Why? Because
Hezbollah seeks war. They don't want peace, no matter what they say. Forget what they say to the media. They are political spokespersons. Hezbollah is provoking Israel because Iran wants to provoke Israel. Hezbollah wants to support Hamas. And this is why, on October 8th, they started attacking Israel, even before Israel responded.
And were it not for Hezbollah, do the Lebanese people want peace with Israel? Because I have to say, of all the cities in the Middle East, Beirut is the city I would love to visit.
Look, I've been to Israel several times now, and I lived in Lebanon for a long time. The people, the Israelis and the Lebanese, resemble each other. They love life. They are educated. They look good. They're invested in themselves, in their families, in their looks. They could be best friends, they know this.
We should be.
We should be.
We are.
We are. If we can be best friends, so can the rest of the Lebanese and the Israelis. But those who follow Hezbollah, those who want death for Israel, prevent anyone from even saying this in public. Now, in the past 10 months, many people say, my problem is not with Israel. My problem, and we're talking about professionals, academics, politicians, they say our problem is with Hezbollah, is with Iran, and we do not support what Hamas has done. You want to help them. There is a project, Federal Lebanon. Let's divorce. Let's divorce.
What do you mean? What's this project, Federal Lebanon?
There is a movement that is growing in Lebanon. They want a model like Switzerland, for example. You take your canton in the south, take the southern suburb of Beirut, and then if you want to go to war with the Israelis, let the Israelis destroy your part. Show us how you will sustain your part of the country, and let us be. We would like to choose different allies, a different method to develop our country, and most of those who want Federal Lebanon are Christians, progressive, liberals, but also Sunnis and some Shia who want a divorce. They don't want war. They're not as strong as Hezbollah. Okay, let's split this country.
That would be an intriguing solution to the problems of Lebanon's governance. Most people are not aware that with such a patchwork of different communities in Lebanon, these specific roles are reserved for members of the different faith communities, right? Under the constitution, the president must be
Maronite,
be a Maronite Christian, and the prime minister must be
a Sunni
Muslim, and the speaker of the parliament must be
Shia.
And it makes a country ungovernable. And so this is fascinating to hear that this ungovernability has geopolitical consequences as well that people are thinking about. I want to talk to you today. You run a project called Arabs Ask, in which you are trying to explain Israel and the Jewish world to the Arab world. So I want to flip things around and ask Israelis Ask. This is where I want to understand from you what the Arab world is thinking. Obviously, not everyone thinks the same, and we'll unpack the nuances of the different perspectives. And we have to start, how can we not, with October 7th. And I'm wondering how that was received across the Arab world, because I see two trends and both of them disturb me deeply. The first is intense support for the October 7th massacre. There was a Doha Institute poll that showed the overwhelming majority of Arab publics across all countries think that the attacks were legitimate. But at the same time, there is a deep denial about what those attacks were. Because when you ask people in Arab countries, did Hamas attack civilians? Were there instances of sexual violence? They deny it. And so it seems they're supporting something about which they are in denial. And I'm wondering how you square that circle.
First of all, you cannot expect the Arab world to sympathize with the Israelis. As I said earlier, your narrative is omitted from their existence until this day. Now, I think we have social media, so they have access to information. Do they want to listen to you? No. Why is that? Because since Israel came to existence, the Arab world, the Arab leaders decided to never acknowledge your existence. And they implemented anti-normalization laws and policies forbidding people-to-people contact with the Israelis. This is a legal aspect that can have serious consequences. Like in Iraq, you can be executed if you are accused of collaborating with Zionists. Who is a Zionist? Is it an Israeli? Is it an American who supports Israel?
It's you now.
And now it's me, and I'm proud to be a Zionist. But in the Arab world, this is a betrayal of your own people. You should never support the Israelis, or else. And the consequences can be serious. Simultaneously, if you're a bit religious, there are many, many, many fatwas condemning people-to-people relations with Israelis. So I am not allowed to listen to you, and slowly but surely I lose interest in listening to you. And no matter what they tell me about you, I will believe it. Even if they tell me that you have, like Khalid Mashal's claim, I find it incredibly interesting. there is a Talmudic conspiracy he knows of, implying that the Talmud is a small book and he had access to it, in which language, I don't know. Serious Jewish scholars need to commit 7 years to understand the Talmud. But
just to read a page a day.
Yeah, and Khalid Mashal knows about it. And these lies spread. And the average Arab who's frustrated, suffering from bad economy, corruption, living under a dictatorship, they believe whatever these clever people on television tell them. And after October 7th, the way the event was presented on the biggest platform, and that is, of course, Al Jazeera, it was presented as an event, as a breakthrough. Look at what these freedom fighters did. And this platform was made accessible to Haniyeh and Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson of the Al-Qassam Brigade, and people were listening to what these personalities were telling them. We are retrieving our rights, our land. Soon we will be in Jerusalem. This is our Al-Quds. They didn't talk about finding a middle ground. They're coming for you. They're talking about bloodshed. And the Israelis learned to start to believe them. They're not exaggerating. They're not doing it for the melodrama, for the clicks. They mean it. The Arab world believes them because there is a stereotype. And this stereotype has nothing to do with you, with the Israeli people. It's an idea that's been painted consistently until this day.
And what is that stereotype?
I like parables. Let's put it this way. The Arab world sees the Palestinian as the Red Riding Hood, innocent, naive, helpless, and the Jew is the big bad wolf. And in this story, Red Riding Hood, we all know it, the story of the wolf is never included. Nobody asked the wolf, what was the wolf doing there? The wolf is bad. It's ugly, it is powerful, and it should be killed. And the rest of the world, the Arab world, and those who support the Palestinian cause are all playing hunters, and they have to kill the wolf. Regardless, nobody asked. Now, I was blessed. I was lucky, and I got acquainted with the wolf, and I heard the story of the wolf. And it happened that the wolf came to tell these helpless Palestinians, or Red Riding Hood, and her grandmother, that this part of the woods where they live is his ancestral home. And he offered to share it with them because there is enough space for both of them. Now, the way people perceive the Jew as the big, ugly, bad wolf can be changed because in the Jungle Book, Mowgli was looked after, raised by a pack of wolves. We sympathize with them, we admire them. It's a matter of representation. Now, it is time for the wolf, for the Zionists, for the Israelis to take back their story and to represent themselves. And you do that through social media. You break that stereotype. And that stereotype, it's not a surprise. It is similar to the stereotype of the Jew back in the 20s, in the 30s, and the 40s in Europe. They are greedy, they control the world, they want to take you down, they plot, there are conspiracies against the world. And this is not true. Now, the West understood it, but it cost the Jews dearly. Nobody acknowledges anti-Semitism in the Arab world. Nobody admits it. So we have no data, it's not researched, and it is time we did this. And this claim that Muslims are not anti-Semites, they're only anti-Zionists, is not true. It is enough to look at events such as the Farhud in 1948. Let's go a bit further.
Earlier than 48.
1840, the Damascus
during
affair.
During the Second World War, the Farhud, the pogrom against
Before that, 1840, the Damascus affair. Let's go a bit further back. In the Ottoman Empire, in Yemen, let's leave the Levant. In Yemen, in the 1800s, the Zaydis issued 2 decrees, the orphan decrees and the latrine scrapers, dung gatherers, there was a job assigned to the Jews. Why? They had to scrape latrines and to transport carcasses and dead bodies, even if you came from a Kohanim family, even if you were observing Shabbat. It interested nobody. And the orphans decree allowed any Muslim man to take the children of a Jewish man who died. Now, the Muslims can argue they did this to look after the poor children, but I'm not sure the mothers perceived it the same way. So this claim that the Jews lived happily for hundreds of years under the Muslims is not true. And it is time to address anti-Semitism in the Arab world.
Why do you think in the Muslim world they tell this story about how the Jews were living happily ever after within the realm of Islam, where they were treated well, until along came the Zionists and ruined everything for everyone? Why do they tell, if we're speaking in parables and speaking about children's stories, why do they tell this fairy tale?
Because they want to portray themselves as the righteous ones. They were fair, they have to govern, they have to restore the caliphate, and then everything will be better again. Then they will restore order in the region, which is not true. And the fact that they had rules ruling life between Muslims and minorities. But let's talk about the dhimmis. Let's talk about Christians and Jews living under Islam. Now, back in 637, when the second caliph, Omar, came to Jerusalem, they claim that he spoke to the patriarch, the Christian patriarch, representing the Byzantines, and he gave him an assurance. He gave an assurance not to the dhimmis, to all the dhimmis, to the Christians. You are allowed to keep your crosses and your churches as long as you drive out of the city, Elia, back at the time, Jerusalem. You drive out the thieves and the Romans, and the Jews were not allowed to live in the city. He demanded that the Jews were not, that they live outside of Jerusalem. Why is that? Because there is a fundamental problem between Islam and Judaism, and that exists in the Quran. And we have to review this, and it is possible. I don't want people to despair. Look at the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Look at Morocco. We need a political decision that's stemming from a vision for the future, for a better future. Do you want endless martyrdom and jihad? Do you want us all to die because you're invested in the afterlife? Or do you want to build in this life and be a good Muslim and try to build ties with the rest of the world instead of committing to destroy the rest of the world? Because this is not only about Israel. Israel is perceived as the proxy of the evil West, right? And we see this in Europe and in the US and in Australia and New Zealand and everywhere around the globe. There is a movement, there is a war, an ongoing war. It's lingering, but it's happening. And we see it between extremism, between political Islam, to call a spade, and the Western civilization, between modernity and barbarism. And I'm afraid we need to pick a side.
We're talking about misconceptions here within the Arab world, misconceptions that have brought immense suffering for us, Israelis and Jews, who have been on the receiving end of the aggression from the Arab world fueled by these misconceptions, but also for the Arab world that has been stuck in this cycle of extremism and conflict, when looking at reality as it is would allow us to move towards peace and reconciliation. We've spoken about the perception of Jews as the big bad wolf. We've spoken about the perception that the Jews lived well under the rule of Islam until the advent of Zionism. There's another misconception that I find intriguing, which is the persistent denial of the Jewish people's ancestral indigenous connections to the land of Israel, the denial that there were ever Jewish temples in Jerusalem, in order to try to tell a story that in fact the Palestinians were here first. Because Jewish indigeneity and the fact that Al-Aqsa is built on the rubble of the ancient Jewish temple undermines the story they tell themselves. So I'm wondering if you can explain to me why the Arab world, despite the multiple mentions of Bani Israel in the Quran, are so adamant in denying that the Jews have an ancient historic connection to this land, and how really that makes sense theologically for them, given the repeated mentions of the children of Israel and their connection to Israel in the Quran.
So the answer is twofold. It's partly ignorance and hypocrisy. There are those who truly know very, very little about the history of the region, and there are those, especially who studied Islam, and theologians and imams, they know that they are being hypocritical when they deny that Jews are indigenous to the land. It suffices to tell any teenage Muslim, what do you know about the Jews? Where was the first time you heard about the Jews and about Bnei Israel? And that's in the Quran. So you do know that Judaism is older than Islam. Let's put it this way. You do know that there were encounters between the Prophet Muhammad and the Jews. So they were there in Hijaz before Islam. So why do they deny any right for the Jews? Because the Prophet Muhammad told them, this is the last book, the last message. This is the final one and the best one. And it is our job to convert the planet. They have to follow our footsteps. And this is our duty, our moral and religious duty. Now, when it comes to archaeological evidence, this is perplexing even to me, because it is there. You can deny it as much as you like, but it is there. Now, unlike the Muslim claims, the Jewish claims are present. You can examine it. You can go to a tunnel tour. I know that many Arabs cannot visit Israel, but there are enough who have European or American passports. You're welcome to come visit, make videos, and share it with people. Now, why do they insist that it doesn't exist? Why do they question the authenticity? I have no idea. But at the same time, the Muslims will never allow archaeologists to examine anything they claim to be related to Islam. Now, that I find a way more interesting question, and I don't have an answer. I guess because they know that they have no proof. There is no proof that Al-Aqsa was in Jerusalem. They know that Jerusalem is not mentioned, not even once in the Quran. This is why they don't want anyone challenging their stories.
When you say they have no proof Al-Aqsa was in Jerusalem, you're not referring to the mosque, you're referring to the Quranic story that Muhammad went to the furthest mosque, and the question is whether that was actually in Jerusalem or not.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, again, I get back to this question. Islam is conscious that there was an ancient Jewish presence here, that there were Jewish temples. That's why they call the city Al-Quds, the holy, right? And so why are they so deeply invested in denying the indigeneity and historical connections of the Jewish people to the land of Israel? And is it just a question of hypocrisy? We know we're being hypocritical, or is there a way that somehow these two things make sense in their heads together?
So you think that they deliberately deny any relation between you and the country because they want to drive you out. So either they don't know you have any ties with this country.
But they do.
Some of them, many of them do. And when they deny your rights to be here, you're asking me why? Because they want to take the country. They don't want you living here. They don't want you governing here. They want to have Jerusalem as well. Now, some kind Muslims, open-minded, educated ones, if you tell them that Jerusalem means to us Jews what Mecca means to you Muslims, they're willing to listen. But these are a minority. But I think slowly they can grow, especially thanks to the UAE and to Saudi Arabia and Morocco. If you remove anti-Semitic content from your curriculum, then people are more open to listen, to ask, why do you live here? we have to challenge the Israelis. Why do you live here? It's not pleasant to live in constant fear, the risk of war. So you must be doing it for a reason. It means an awful lot to you. And in order for them to be willing to listen, we need a shift. We need a shift, and I think this will come thanks to social media.
Help me understand another misconception fueled by social media. Not in the Arab world specifically, but actually in the Western world, with the useful idiots, we can call them that, chanting "from the river to the sea" on university campuses. Now ask some of them what river, what sea, they don't know. Ask others, maybe they do know, and they say, "I believe that all the people between the river and the sea should live in a single, democratic, secular state that respects the rights and equality of all citizens." Now that's not what Hamas, Palestinian National Movement, other terrorist groups around the region mean when they talk about "from the river to the sea," and when Hassan Nasrallah refers to fallen Hezbollah fighters as having been killed on the way to Jerusalem, he's not referring to the conquest of Jerusalem as an attempt to establish a peaceful, democratic state that respects equality for all. So tell me, within the Palestinian world and the Arab world, when they say "from the river to the sea," what do they think it means?
What do they think it means? Who are they?
Obviously not all think the same, but let's work one by one. When Hamas says "from the river to the sea," what do they mean?
I grew up in the Arab world, and as you mentioned, I lived in Lebanon, Syria, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. The Westerners, the Europeans, think they understand the region. They don't. And I grew up in this world, and I know that almost everybody wants Israel gone, vanished. You leave, you die, you're raped, you burn, nobody cares. You need to leave. So all these movements, especially Hezbollah, Hamas, Ayatollahs in Iran since 1979, they are committed to the demise of Israel. Now, some moderates don't care, they're indifferent. If you'd like to go back to the US or to Russia, you're welcome. But if you're all slaughtered, the Arab world could not care less. Now, I'm not talking about all Arabs, but the majority of the Arab world could not care less. This is why they supported, they celebrated what happened on October 7th. They mourned Haniyeh. Haniyeh, who celebrated October 7th. He was mourned not only in the Arab world, in the West. Western media outlets portrayed Haniyeh as a peace-loving dove. I can't understand why. Like, this is the only thing I don't understand.
Maybe I could try to explain.
Please.
I think they're just so invested in a narrative that sees Israel as being the bad party that they take any information and try to fit it into that mental template. And that if they ran headlines saying Haniyeh, leader of fascistic death cult, got what he deserved, I would make it very difficult for them to continue to sell a narrative that Israel is in fact the aggressor in this conflict. But I wanted to go back to what you were saying earlier, because there are people in the West who consider themselves progressive, who say, I also think there should be no Israel. It doesn't mean I think the Israelis should be killed. They should stay. It just shouldn't be a Jewish state. There should be one state. It should be, whatever the democracy there decides. And I want to know what we tell them. They say, I want one state. It shouldn't be Israel, but it doesn't necessarily mean I want all the Jews to be slaughtered. And I'm wondering when Hamas and Fatah and Hezbollah and more broadly in the Arab world say there should be no more Israel, like, where do I fit in that? What does it mean for me and my apartment in Tel Aviv?
Yeah. The level of naivety is painful. When I was 12, I also didn't understand, why do we need wars? Let's all love each other. This is not how the world works.
It's how it should work, though.
Absolutely. But when we're 12, this is not reality. Maybe we can reach a point where we're there. But saying, why can't you give them equal rights, make one state, call it whatever, maybe you can call it Israel, and you should all live equal in this country. Now, how does that work demographically? How does that work? It will be a majority of Arabs told all their lives, also by Arab countries, that it is your country and you have to take it back. So they fought for it several times. They don't mind dying for it. They don't mind sacrificing their own children for this illusion, for this idea. Their country, their Palestine. Okay, now when they become a majority, what is the logical thing? What would you do in a democracy?
So people on the progressive left would say, I think there should be no more Israel, just like there should be no more apartheid South Africa. And then there was one country that was a multicultural, multiracial democracy. I'm protesting on campus in Colombia from the river to the sea, not because I want to slaughter the Jews, but because I think the Jews should be a minority in a democratic, the first democratic Arab country, United Palestine.
Now, this democracy functions because it's governed by the Jews or by Israelis. If the Palestinians were to take over, this country would look like the West Bank, or it would look like Hamas, like Lebanon, like Syria, like Iraq, like Yemen. Isn't that an impressive model, right? They will kill each other. They did in 2005, 2006. So what is it? Which model do we want to implement to improve Israel? You want to improve it. You want peace. The players who refuse a peaceful solution are the Palestinians. You have to talk to them. And talking to them doesn't mean, okay, I'm going to acknowledge a Palestinian state. So you've committed atrocities on October 7th. Now we're going to reward you because we want to appease you. Here you go. Now I recognize your state. I don't understand the logic. You've lost any right to demand anything after what happened on October 7th. I don't know if people are seeing the video footage emerging from Gaza. Hamas got away with what they've done to the Israelis, and the world thought, no, it's okay. They're baby Jews. It's okay if they're killed. These are Jewish women. It's okay if they're raped. And they forgot that these monsters, this is how they treat Gazans who disagree with them. This is how they treat their children and their women. And this is how they will treat you, given the chance.
So bottom line, when the people who are taking up arms with the goal of, quote unquote, liberating Palestine from the river to the sea, chant from the river to the sea, what are they planning to do to the rest of us who live between the river and the sea? Do they plan on welcoming us into a nice, inclusive democracy in the United Arab Islamic Caliphate of Palestine?
How can you say inclusive, united, emirate, caliphate? These words don't come together. It doesn't work this way. And I don't think I've ever heard a Palestinian leader say inclusive. Not because they want to exclude you. They want to exclude you, but also gays and liberals and progressives and each other. So inclusive is a big word. Baby steps. They're not there yet. They still have to figure out who's going to govern. And now the Chinese brokered an agreement between Fatah and the Palestinian, the PA and Hamas. So they're trying baby steps.
But within this Palestinian vision that says, all of the land is Palestine, it's all going to be ours, what do they expect to happen to the Jews who are there?
You know the answer, Elon.
But my viewers don't.
They plan to kill every Jew. They want you out. Whether you go back to the US, to Russia, to Ukraine, or whether...
Iraq in my case.
Look at that. Iraq, Morocco, very interesting point you mentioned here. They want the Jews gone. They want them dead. I know this because I heard it. I grew up with what people said in the Arab world. But let's assume they want the Jews to go back where they came from. So there are approximately 850,000 Jews who could potentially go back to the Arab world. Most of them left their assets, their possessions, their properties. Let's talk about that. Let's give them back what was theirs. Now, if you
that's a fascinating point, because often they'll say, go back where you came from. I don't care if it's Poland, go back to Iraq. And then you say, well, actually, you know what? When over 100,000 Jews left Iraq and the whole Iraqi middle class essentially collapsed in the early 50s, they left behind a lot of assets. Can we get those back? Plus interest and appreciation. Suddenly not so keen to turn the clock backwards.
Everyone is vocal about the 700,000 Palestinians who were forced to leave the Nakba. We know it was a tragedy, but the Arabs pretend that they had no role. They played no role in this Nakba. You opted for a war, and you lost this war, and you keep lamenting. Actually, you went to war repeatedly with Israel, and against all odds, the Israelis won. So people move on. You have to move on. Now, you want the right of return. It's not going to happen for the 700,000 Palestinians. How many millions are they? Meanwhile, again, very interesting. It keeps growing. The numbers keep growing. How about the Jews? Let's play this game. Let's look at the Jews who had to leave the Arab countries. Some of these Arab countries have 0 Jews left, but a lot of assets and properties. If we talk about this, if we put both points, both cards on a negotiating table, we could reach an agreement. But of course, we don't care about what happened to the Jews. Let's talk about the Palestinians. Let's talk about Red Riding Hood.
Which is surreal because it's a narrative that not only erases the role of Arab and Muslim oppression of Jews, but almost erases them from the narrative of being part of the Middle East altogether, which makes it easier to support the narrative of them being European colonial imports. I wonder if you could help me understand another misconception, and this is a misconception not within the Arab world, but actually within the West. I grew up and at university learning, there is a gulf in the Muslim world between Sunni and Shia Islam. And it has its roots going all the way back to the succession battle over the Prophet Muhammad, but now you see it driving tensions in the Middle East between the Sunni bloc led by Saudi Arabia and Egypt and Iran. And yet, you have organizations like Hamas, which is a Sunni Muslim organization, that is functioning as an Iranian proxy army in the service of the great Shia power that seeks to impose a Shia empire across the Middle East. So help me understand, to what extent do the ancient theological schisms between Sunni and Shia Islam really play a role in the geopolitical map of the Middle East today? And how is it that such large sections of the Sunni world now see Shia Iran as their great savior and not the rest of the Sunni Arab world?
Perhaps it is because in the Gulf, the UAE, Bahrain signed agreements with Israel. They joined the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia signaled repeatedly they are willing to join the Abraham Accords, and now they're perceived as infiltrated regimes, entities. The Zionists convinced them they have them on their side. Unlike Iran, which is consistent since 1979 in its vision, they're committed to the Palestinian cause, to the Islamic cause. It will restore the Arab dignity, and they've never changed. They're still pursuing the same path. Meanwhile, this path is destructive. It destroyed large parts of the Muslim and Arab world, but those who are invested in the afterlife do not care. They see Iran, and it's unfair to say Iran. We have to...
The Iranian regime. I know we keep getting told off on social media by diaspora Iranians saying, please stop saying Iran. It's the Islamic Republic. It's the Iranian regime, the Ayatollahs who hijacked their country. And we're trying, even though Iran is a shorthand and it's just fewer syllables, to say the Islamic Republic or the Iranian regime to make it clear that our enemy is the fascistic, theocratic terrorists who have taken control of Tehran and not the incredibly culturally rich Persian and Iranian people.
That said, I have to also mention that in general, those who are educated, like the Arabs who are educated, who live in the West, who are intelligent, see through what's happening. And they're not fond of Iran, and they see how destructive this role of the octopus is. those who follow, those who perceive the Iranian regime as leading a heroic movement are those frustrated in the Arab world. Frustrated because their economies don't function, because they are oppressed, and they think the reason behind their suffering is the West. And the West planted Israel in the Middle East for geopolitical reasons. And the truth is, if you speak even to the most simple person and you tell them, your problem is not caused by Israel, domestic violence, Israel will not prevent any Arab country from criminalizing domestic violence, from recycling, from investing their energy and their money into building a better future, a better education. Israel has nothing to do with this. They're the scapegoat, and the average Arab citizen believes the lies. This is why they consist the majority in the Arab and Islamic worlds. But those educated and intelligent, they don't support Iran, and they live in the West for good reasons. Now, those who live in the West, after their families escaped from the Arab world or from Islamic countries, and they want a caliphate where they live, whether in Hamburg or in Amsterdam or in Philadelphia. Now that seems to me as a mental disease. They don't understand what they're asking for. And I advise, careful what you wish for, because if you get it, you will understand then what do they mean by a caliphate. It's, I don't know, haven't we seen a sample of that when ISIS took over parts of Iraq and Syria?
And if we can just go back, because I'm still trying to understand the connection between Sunni terrorist groups and their Shia patron, the tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran, their geopolitical competition in the region. Does that have anything to do with the ancient theological schisms between Sunni and Shia Islam? Or is this idea of a contest between the Sunni and Shia worlds simply a fiction of, figment of the imagination of Western academics now, and it has nothing to do with that?
No, absolutely. There's the Sunnis and the Shia, at the end of the day, they are set to kill one another because they have conflicting narratives. And who's gonna rule and govern the Islamic world? The Shia think that they are the righteous ones, and yet Mecca is in Saudi Arabia. So the pilgrimage happens there, and it generates a lot of money, and it gives an authoritarian role to Saudi Arabia. This is why they lead the Islamic world. Now imagine this. Imagine if Iran could have Jerusalem. It would be somehow the equivalent of Mecca. They could, if they restored that, they could lead the Islamic world, not only the Arab world.
Oh, that's fascinating. So you're saying that essentially part of the reason that Iran is so committed to supporting terrorist organizations that want to conquer Jerusalem in the name of Islam, and that it's pushing for Palestinian statehood, is because it knows that that Palestinian state would be an Iranian client state, and that Iranian control of Jerusalem would put them on a par with Saudi Arabia for control of the entire Islamic world.
Absolutely. As simple as that. They want to lead the Islamic world. This is why they portray Saudi Arabia as a traitor of their cause, of the Islamic Ummah. And they are set to restore the dignity and one of the holy sites of Islam. Yeah.
And therefore, those in the West who are calling for the creation of a Palestinian state that would control the old city of Jerusalem, knowing that the Iranian regime plans to flood the region with weapons and turn a future state of Palestine into an Iranian client state, just like Gaza and Lebanon and Yemen are Iranian client states, are in fact playing straight into the hands of the theocrats in Tehran who want to control Jerusalem in order to take leadership of the Islamic world. People who are supporting a Palestinian capital in East Jerusalem over the old city are playing straight into the hands of the Iranian regime's plans for regional domination.
Yes, and I think that is why Jordan and Egypt will help Israel, no matter what, because they know what it means if Iran, after having a corridor, it's way larger than a corridor, meanwhile, through Iraq, Syria, and southern Lebanon, they know what it means if they took over Palestine, what it means for them, because they are Sunni states who collaborate with the West. So when Iran attacked Israel, they were helping the Israelis fend against the Iranian attack. They didn't do it because they wanted to protect the Israelis. They do it because they know if the Iranians took over, they don't stand a chance in the region.
Do you think there is any sort of recognition, and at what level within the Arab world, that helping Israel defend itself, specifically leaving Jerusalem and its holy sites under Israeli sovereignty, is critical for their security as Arab countries because it keeps that site out of Iranian hands?
I don't know, because the Arab street, they want destruction, they want a war with Israel. However, the leaders understand what that means if the region is further destabilized. I don't think that the Libyans would worry about that because their country is a mess. The Syrians do not worry. And at the same time, have you seen demonstrations in Libya or in Damascus, pro-Palestine demonstrations? People are preoccupied with the misery they live for more than a decade now. Those countries in the Arab world that managed to establish some stability, they would support, even if under the table, Israel, and they would rout for Israel's victory against Iran, because they've seen what Iran has done to the region. And they've seen that Iran has influence even in the USA, on American universities. They know about clandestine activities in Africa, in Southern America. They know of the outreach of Iran, and it's not just the Iranian regime. It's an alliance across the globe, and it is pure evil. We've seen that evil is subjective, and I think we know, at least those who lived in countries where Iran has influence, we know what life under their influence, under their allies, looks like.
Fascinating. We've been talking about a lot of the misconceptions within the Arab and the Muslim world about Israel, and I want, in just a moment, to pivot to talk about your social media activism and why you are so optimistic that social media can correct these misconceptions. But I'm wondering what you think Israel needs to do, beyond running social media accounts, to correct those misconceptions in the Middle East. Is this a question of showing Israeli vulnerability, showing our humanity, showing that there is suffering on our side, and appealing to goodwill in the Arab world to put war to one side and embrace peace? Or do events like the alleged elimination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran make a much bigger impact on the Arab psyche? Because instead of saying, we're sick of war, please be friends with us because you'll feel sorry for us, Israel is sending a message, don't mess with us, we're here to stay, you want to be on the side of the strong. Before
October 7th, I used to accompany delegations. We used to take Arabs to Auschwitz, tell them the story of the Jew, try to humanize the Jew in their eyes, then they will sympathize with the Jew, with the Israelis, and understand that these are human beings. Now, after October 7th, I no longer do that. I think, personally, we have to switch to fighter mode. In the West, it is helpful to present the Israeli as a human being We also go dancing, we drink beer. We're human beings just like you. We don't like to put on our gear and go to Gaza in this heat. We don't enjoy anybody's death. However, this is not how things work in the Arab world. If you want to live in peace, you need deterrence. You need to remind them that Israel is small, but Israel is mighty. You need to show them that the Mossad could kill Haniyeh if it was the Mossad in Tehran. They need to be reminded that you crossed every red line. So did Hezbollah. They, it seems, in Lebanon, they perceived Israel's restraint in the north as weakness, and they fell into a trap. The Israelis opted for a military solution in the south, and the world condemns Israel no matter what. Even when they saw babies killed, babies kidnapped, babies still are in Gaza. Do you see the world's tears? It doesn't work. Israel opted for a diplomatic option in the north, and the world, condemning Israel in the south, had more than 10 months to deter and stop Hezbollah. Was the world successful in doing that? No. This is not going to be resolved unless Israel restores its role, its face in the Arab world, showing them, I've been patient, I showed restraint, I tried speaking to you, I told you that my people are human beings, give me back my babies, give us back our women, let's open a new chapter, disarm and this will end. And they said no, and they spat at you in your face. Now, many leaders have been eliminated, and I believe many more will be.
Inshallah.
Inshallah, B'ezrat Hashem. And I hope the next will be Nasrallah. He's done more than enough.
From your mouth to Allah's ears.
Yes. This will work, and this is the only path, unfortunately, to end this bloodshed in the region. We, and I know you, we don't want war. We want to enjoy our life, raise our children, just like many Gazans. As I do believe that many Gazans just want to live their lives, take care of their children. But there are leaders who tell you, no, it is better for you to sacrifice your children. They will be shaheeds, they will be martyrs, they will go and have versions in the sky. Now, you know what? Maybe they are right, but let's send them to paradise. Let's send the leaders up to paradise, let them enjoy their 72 versions, and let them leave us alone. We would rather live here.
I'm still not quite managing to get a sense of you. Because it's one thing to say that you've been through this de-radicalization process where you've learned that you don't have to hate Israel, you don't have to hate Jews. Then you go, huh, okay, interesting. And then dedicate your life to something else. And I'm trying to understand why you have decided to come out swinging and call yourself a Zionist and put yourself out there to try to support Jews and correct Arab misconceptions about Israel and set up this initiative called Arab Asks. Why are you doing this?
Because when I was a child and we used to hide in the pantry, we were very, very scared.
What were you hiding from?
Israeli airstrikes.
This was when?
When I was a child in the 80s and in the 90s in Lebanon. I used to be very scared and think, why aren't adults doing anything against it? And of course, the Lebanese are like the Israelis. Even though they didn't have electricity, and I'm talking about my parents and the neighbors, they would sit, play cards, even if they had candles, drink scotch, and carry on with their lives. What is going to happen? And this is the attitude I see in Israel as well. But I was so frustrated, like, why aren't they doing something to stop this? We always talk about they, them, they have to solve it, the politicians, but you also have a role. Now, I grew up to be proactive. And when this happens, especially on October 7th, it filled me with anger. And I always say, I'm not a spokesperson, I'm an accidental activist, but I'm mostly an angry mother. I have a child. And if anyone, God forbid, would dare think to do what they've done to the people on October 7th, what they've done to Israelis, but also to Muslims. I met the Bedouins who were freed. This is unbelievable. It is time to say no. Enough is enough. Enough is enough. And we have to try and stop it. People say, yeah, but what I say, it makes no difference. Well, it does make a difference. I understand that there are billions behind Al Jazeera and various other channels, but we have social media. Each one of us, and this is something for the Israelis, for the Jews around the world to understand, to internalize, and to take action. Each has a space on social media. Make use of that. Try to explain that you are not the big bad wolf. You are not. You tell the story of the Jew inside you, whether you are gay, liberal, Orthodox, tell your own story. Why do you have this connection with the land of Israel? Most people don't know. They don't even... Can you believe that people on protests in the Western world can't find Israel on the map, but still they want a Palestine? They don't know where, they don't know why, they have no context. It is your job. Roll your sleeves up. Mathematically speaking, we are outnumbered. And I say we because I am part of this camp. We are outnumbered, but it is quality versus quantity. We have to explain to these buffoons that there is a reason why we live here. And we are the ones who are willing to share. We always come to you and reach out with an open hand, with an open heart. And we're stabbed, we're spat at. Enough is enough.
Tell me about your project, Arab Asks. What are you trying to do, and what sort of reception have you been getting? Are people curious and inquisitive, or hostile and skeptical? Do you think you're getting through?
I was a dinosaur. I knew nothing about social media before October 7th. Yes, believe it or not. And somehow I started getting thousands of followers. I have no idea. But because our voice makes a difference. But
Where are these followers? Can you see the breakdown by country?
Not really. We know the followers for Arabs Ask. We have metrics meanwhile.
Where are they?
And there are many, even from Iran. From Iran, from Indonesia, Muslims from all over the globe, but also from Cairo, from Damascus, and some send us direct messages, although they live in Tehran or in Beirut, and they're not intimidated. So I partnered with a company, I'm not going to say the name, and they are professionals, they are social media strategists. We started working. If you look in the comments section, you will mostly find negative ones. Of course, the Israelis are very supportive, but the Arabs bash us with insults and like stupid comments, which is good for our algorithms. Please keep it up. But we get a lot of direct messages and we document it for donors. It is unbelievable. And sometimes it's heartwarming because people share stories about them losing family members, friends, jobs, because they stood up, they spoke up. And for your listeners, they need to understand that a lot of people love the Israelis. They cannot afford speaking up because if they have an uncle who lives in Cairo, if they have a mom, an old mom living in Tehran, they are afraid of the consequences for their family, or they still want to visit Beirut, so they don't want to be associated publicly with the Israelis. But under the table, a lot of people are writing for you, for your victory. And I know that Israel will prevail because I see the good in the Israelis, people who lost children, people who have family members who are hostages in Gaza, and they still believe that peace will come. See, this faith that I see in the Israelis, it fills me with hope for the future. They are the righteous ones. They are misunderstood, the most misunderstood people I've ever met. This is why I feel it is our moral obligation, our duty to speak up against everything Israel, this tiny country, is facing at the moment.
You're here in Israel for 2 months.
Yes.
You've already been on a journey of de-radicalization, of shedding the conceptions and stereotypes about Jews, but you're still on a journey. So I'm wondering, while you've been here, how have you changed?
First, maybe I didn't go through a process of de-radicalization, but I have to say that I am a recovered anti-Semite. This is what I used to be. And the Muslims and Arabs have to internalize this concept because they too can change, can open their heart and their minds. Now, I came to Israel this time for the 4th time, and I never had a negative encounter, not a single one. Of course, there are a few Israelis who are skeptical, who think, what's her agenda? Why are you here?
I'm still trying to suss it out.
Oh, come on, Elon, come on. People who are supposed to interrogate me at the airport, one of them had tears in her eyes. I get hugs. People don't understand. Like, you're born in Damascus and you're coming here? Damascus, USA? I'm like, yeah, for sure. Damascus, Syria.
She reaches out with her arms and you're expecting to get patted down at the airport. And in fact, she's just reaching out for a hug.
For a hug. Unbelievable. And they say things about me in Hebrew. They try to discuss, like, what do you mean she's coming here to do? What? And I speak to them in Hebrew and they're like, are you for real? Like, where are you coming from? My experiences were always positive. This is a people filled with love for the other, curiosity, love for their children, for the elderly. People help each other on the buses. I just watch, when I sit in the shuk, and I live near the shuk, I love Jerusalem and I feel at home, and I will eventually move to Jerusalem. I sit in the shuk and I look at all these Israelis passing by. You see every shape and color, every size, every nationality. It's bustling, it's vibrant, despite everything. And they care for one another. And they adore the soldiers and they wish them well and they give them gifts. This I've never seen anywhere else. And I lived in 7 countries. And this fills me with hope. This is a nation you have to learn from, not annihilate.
Rawan, this conversation has filled me with hope as well. The thought that with enough education, enough correcting misconceptions, enough human-to-human encounters, it is possible to eliminate hatred and prejudice and move towards a better Middle East. I do hope that you will eventually move to Jerusalem. It would be lovely to have you around more. Rawan Osman, how can people follow you and your work?
You go to my Instagram mostly, but I have followers even on platforms where I'm not active, such as X.
What is your Instagram?
Rawan, R-A-W-A-N, Osman, O-S-M-A-N 2024. You find me on X, you find me on LinkedIn. But I'll tell you one last thing, and this is my message for the Israelis, and I try to say it in every time I can. I wear the Star of David around my neck for 3 years now. And I look at it every morning, and I look at the 6 triangles pointing in different directions. They share the center. I wear it because I think it is the most powerful symbol. And it's not only religious. I'm not wearing chai. I'm wearing a political and a religious symbol. And I would like every Israeli to remember that although the Star of David that's on your flag points in many different directions, you share the center. Now come back to the center, no matter where the center is. And remember that your worst political opponent, your worst enemy in Israel, would never kill your child, would never rape your daughter. So I understand that you bicker, 2 Jews, 3 opinions. I understand. But remember that you cannot afford fighting in public. Close the door when this is over and kill each other, and then you will cry, and then you will recover, and then the country will heal. But for now, it kills me to see Israelis pointing fingers at one another. Not now.
Rawan, on that beautiful note, thank you. Thank you for coming on State of a Nation.
Thank you, Elon.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode of State of a Nation, a fascinating discussion with Rawan Osman, correcting misconceptions within the Arab world about the most misunderstood people in the world, the Jews, the Israelis. As always, if you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever else you get your podcasts. Give us a like and a follow on all the social media platforms. Give us a good reviews and share this episode with a friend who you think can use this information to correct other misconceptions and help move towards peace and integrating Israel in the region, in the Middle East, where it very clearly and firmly belongs. I'm Elon Levy, and thanks for watching.